Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to welcome all of our guests today. We have Anthony Schiro, VP of Quality and Sustainability of Navitas Semconductor, Alexandra Degher, HP's Carbon Neutral Implementation Lead and 21-year sustainability expert, and Connie Hensler, Interface's Global Director of Environmental Management and Product Stewardship and longtime LCA practitioner. And our own Lise Laurin of EarthShift Global's CEO will moderate our panel today. So take it away, Lisa.
Thank you, Holly. You know, carbon neutrality is a big topic these days, and I know a lot of you are very interested in both what it is and how you do it. I want to thank you all for joining us. Today, we're going to really delve into how to get it done. And we're going to do that through our panel of experts who are all on that journey. We're going to start with Connie and Interface. Interface makes carpet, and Connie, feel free to expand on this when you get talking. Interface is that company that when people say, what's a great example of a company doing sustainability? Interface is always my first choice. They've been at it for a long time and have been through the ringer and done it all, and it's just amazing to see how far they've come. They're the farthest along on this journey to carbon neutrality and beyond. So Connie's going to share her wisdom with us. Alexandra's representing HP, printer and laptop and 3D printer manufacturer. And again, Alex, if you want to expand on that, please do. And HP, the way it's been described to me, sustainability is part of HP's value, what they bring to their customers, what they bring to society. And while not as far along on their journey to carbon neutrality, they're kind of right in the midst of it. They've been doing a lot, have some experience, and a ways to go yet. And then Anthony's going to represent Navitas for us. Navitas is just beginning its journey. Navitas is a company providing power semiconductors. These are the chips that convert your outlet power into power for your computer, your laptop, whatever. And their real benefit is that their losses are a lot less than conventional power semiconductors. So right from the get-go, they're looking at reducing energy consumption, reducing greenhouse gas emissions for their scope 3 or scope 2, sorry, for their customers. And as part of that mindset, they're embedding sustainability in their company. So Anthony's going to kind of represent the beginning of that journey. And we're going to go through and I'll ask each of the panelists some questions. And if you haven't already, if you want to change your view to either gallery view or speaker view, and if you right click, you can, on your screen, you can hide non-video participants. So if you have a whole screen full of non-video participants, you might want to do that. So we're going to ask some questions of each of the panelists. At any point, if you have questions of the panelists, please chat them to me privately so we don't distract the speakers. And I'll ask as many as I can of those questions throughout the webinar so that we can get your questions answered, because that's why we're here. And with that, I want to extend my great appreciation to the panel for sharing your wisdom with us. All right, I'm going to start with Connie, furthest along in this journey. And I'm going to ask, I know the story of interfaces was like elementary reading for me in sustainability, but I know there's still a lot of people who don't know the beginning of interface. So what led interface to go toward carbon neutrality in the first place?
Thank you for all your kind comments about interface. I will say that we started our sustainability journey back in 1994. And at this point, it seems like that was the dark ages of sustainability. So there was really no path. We were just trying to figure it out on our own along the way. We didn't know how to measure our environmental impact. We knew we wanted to reduce our effect on the environment. So we were really struggling with how do you measure? What is that? How do you measure it? And then in 2000, we finally found life cycle assessment. And really that led us to saying, okay, now we know what our impact is. What are we going to do about it, right? It helps us to focus on carbon, looking at our global warming potential. And that led to the development of what we called our Cool Carpet, which was our carbon neutral products program, which we started in 2005. And there was really no roadmap or standards. We really just had to develop our own program and our own methodology, but it's come a long way since then, for sure. And I guess I didn't really go into anything else about interface. Just very briefly, the story of how we got on this mission. You know, our founder, Ray Anderson, he had run the company for like 20 years, and we manufactured flooring, and he was really proud of his business. But what happened in 1994 was he had an environmental epiphany. He called it his stake in the heart, where he recognized all the damage that industry does to the environment. And suddenly he was not so proud anymore of what his company had been doing these last 20 years. And so he put us on a mission. And that mission was to eliminate our environmental impact, which is a huge task. And we've been on that mission ever since. Yeah. So that's how we got into carbon neutral products.
Super, thanks, Connie. And how far have you come at this point?
We've come so far since 2005. Back then it was an offering. You can buy carbon neutral floor from us if you want to. But at this point, now it's not a choice. We make all of our products carbon neutral globally over their entire life cycle. Not just cradle to gate, but the delivery, installation, use, and end of life. So we take full responsibility for every square meter of product that we put out there in the world. So it's a big program at this point. Our approach has always been to reduce impact as much as possible, but then you've got to offset the rest. Last year, we had a big breakthrough where we actually started making carbon negative products, cradle to gate carbon negative. That is to say that the carbon removals are greater than the carbon emissions from cradle to gate for those products. Of course, we still take responsibility for the rest of the life cycle, so we still purchase offsets and make the overall products carbon neutral. And this year, a big step we're taking is we're getting certified as a carbon neutral company, not just carbon neutral products. And we've set a new impossible mission for ourselves. Our goal is to become a carbon negative company by the year 2040. So we don't know how we're going to do that. We're going to set that big target, and now we're going to figure it out along the way.
Wow, that is super exciting.
It's nervous. It makes me nervous.
Oh, I bet. Connie's been really right in the middle of all this through the whole development, and I also want to mention that she is a huge contributor to the LCA community as a whole, and we thank you for that, and thank you for.
I love the LCA community. It's a great bunch of people with, doing the right thing in mind, and it's great to work with that whole community and the American Center for Life Cycle Assessment. Yeah.
Thanks, Connie. Appreciate that. Alexandra, can we turn to you and ask you really what led HP to go after carbon neutrality in the beginning?
So yeah, sustainability has been embedded in HP's DNA for 80 years. And recently, with all the issues with climate change and, well, recently for the last 20 years, all the issues with climate change, it was just something that we knew that we had to do. So we made a claim in April to be the world's most sustainable and just technology company. And as part of that, we have 3 tiers. We have climate, of course, human rights, and digital equity. As part of the climate piece, not only are we looking at carbon reduction and getting to net zero, but we also have 2 other goals for circularity as well as forests. So we wanted to make sure that we are not just doing carbon, but doing, you know, more significant, setting more significant goals. For carbon specifically, we have gone beyond SBTI. So we have 50% reduction in carbon from a 2019 baseline, but then net zero by 2040, so 10 years ahead. We also have parts of the business that we're trying to move to carbon neutral earlier. So our operations, we want to have carbon neutral by 2025. And then we want to have all of our supplies business as well as our customer service carbon neutral by 2030. So we just felt like these were important, it needs to be done. And so we are moving forward with it.
Great, thank you. And how far have you come at this point?
Yeah, well, I know Tom Etheridge is on the line. Tom and I started the LCA, basically launched LCA for HP about 15 years ago. And at that point, you know, neither one of us really knew what we were doing. We used it to do some life cycle assessments on some of our products, mostly for product comparisons and identifying hotspots, also make targeted reductions, right? So we trying to figure out, of these different products, where are the biggest hotspots? Okay, let's go target reductions for those. We've come quite a long way. So now we use LCA to estimate our full value chain, HP's full value chain carbon footprint. We assess the carbon footprint of almost all of our products, which we have quite a lot of products, as you might imagine. And then we use LCA to set our net zero baseline. We still use it to identify hotspots, but on a larger scale. And we're also starting to use it to measure and track reduction goals and our offsetting needs for some of our carbon neutral, our customer carbon neutral programs. So a lot of uses for LCA at HP at this point. If you look at our overall carbon footprint, about 99%, and this is in our sustainable impact report, but about 99% is assessed using LCA. That other 1% of our footprint is all of our offices and operations. So that's the importance of LCA. And that's why it's become exceptionally important in our business to meet all of our goals and to set goals and to measure our goals and to meet our goals.
Great, thank you so much. Anthony, I'm going to turn to you as the most recent one to embark upon this journey. So what led Navitas to go after carbon neutrality in the first place?
Okay, hi everybody, and hi Lisa, thank you for having me here. So let me just, you gave a short update on Navitas. Let me just say again, we're a power semiconductor company. Most companies, or most people know of semiconductors as computing devices that are the basis for using a lot of energy. Power semiconductors, as you said, convert energy from high voltage or high power to lower voltage or lower power that makes them more efficient to use for those computing devices or other devices that run off electricity. So it's really converting electricity and converting energy is core to what we do. Our company Navitas, it means energy in Latin, and it's been our focus for our whole leadership team for nearly all of our careers on how can we make this energy conversion process more and more efficient. And at Navitas, we're using a new material, a new semiconductor material called gallium nitride, or GaN, that helps us achieve step function improvements in efficiency of that energy conversion. So what most people might know as like the USB charger for your phone that you plug into the wall to charge up your phone, or the AC to DC adapter for your laptop, that's where you find our part, and that's where our part can help make those applications much more energy efficient and smaller, so using less materials, which also adds to the benefit of our product. So basically our goal for our company has always been to save energy, and within the past 10 or 20 years, depending on different companies and consumers, energy savings has become pretty synonymous with carbon footprint reduction and carbon neutrality. And so it's really at the forefront of our customers' minds that saving this energy impacts their carbon footprint. So that's very important for us to help our customers. And it's very important for us to see that impact on the rest of the world. So that's how we got into, we're in the energy saving business, and we think that translates, of course, very well to a sustainability impact we can have, our technology can have, and that we can really help be drivers in the semiconductor industry on this topic.
Great, thank you. And how far have you come at this point?
Yeah, so, well, we've worked very closely with EarthShift Global and have really taken a LCA-focused approach to measuring our product's impact. We are a technology company. We're a bunch of technical focused people, and we always find it easier to quantify, have a good quantification method to be able to base our decisions on, whether it's what new products are we going to develop, what markets do we go after. I mentioned a lot about computing, but anything that uses a high voltage battery or AC wall power needs a power semiconductor. And as we all know, more and more of the industry is moving from fossil fuel-based energy to electrical-based energy. So as time goes on, there's a lot of impact we can have if we get gallium nitride to replace the old technology, which is based on silicon. And so we work together. So far, we've completed a screening LCA on both the GaN die, GaN versus silicon, and a GaN versus silicon-based USB-C charger. We're in the process of completing our organizational LCA to identify our full both carbon footprint as well as other environmental impacts of our company overall, and a full comparative product LCA on both, again, on our GaN semiconductor versus silicon, and on a GaN enabled USB-C charger versus a silicon charger. And those are almost done. We're getting really close. And it's confirming for us that there's a big improvement in the dematerialization of the power supply. By using GaN, we can shrink the size much smaller because it's much more energy efficient and generates less heat, therefore allowing our customers to shrink everything that they make to get the same power out. And it's showing that in-use application is a significant reduction in the use phase of the life cycle assessment when you compare a GaN-based application to a silicon-based application. So, as you said, we're at the beginning, but we're very excited that from the results we see, as well as efforts we're taking to look at offsetting any impacts due to our devices that we manufacture is to very soon be able to be a carbon neutral company and guarantee carbon neutral products to our customers as a leader in the semiconductor industry.
Great, thank you, Anthony. So I've got some questions for all of you, and this time I'm going to go in reverse order. We'll start with the newest entry first and go around the other direction. Anthony, what are some of the pitfalls and misconceptions that you've had to deal with as you embarked on this journey?
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so there are a number of them. There's a lot to learn. And as Connie and Alexandra talked about, they've learned over many years of doing this, and we want to do the same. So we've tried to partner with some experts, of course, to help teach us. I'll focus maybe on two specific items. The first one is we found that the availability of primary data for semiconductors is pretty sparse. Not as detailed as would be helpful for us. And the primary data available for power semiconductors is even sparser, almost non-existent. And so we're having to do a lot of sort of correlation or extrapolation from what is currently available, which, we would like to do better. So maybe everyone on the call knows what primary data is, but in particular, we're talking about how much energy is used in a wafer fab to make a given power semiconductor device based on its actual processing in wafer fab and in assembly and final testing. So there is papers and literature out there that have studied this, and there is data available, but I see it as a very important area to provide leadership in the semiconductor community to get really focused on being able to do really good life cycle assessments based on strong primary data and reduce the uncertainties involved with the state the current data is in. So that's one key one that directly affects the LCA. The other aspect is on whose responsibility or who owns the carbon footprint. So there are many layers in driving carbon impact, right? There's the consumer and the consumer behaviors. There are the product manufacturers. You have two represented on this panel of very good products manufacturers that define a product and understand the consumer use of that product and optimize that product the best they can for their business end goals. And then you have a supply, you have the next level in the supply chain. So they use companies to make their products. And then a couple more levels down are the component suppliers. So we are one of them, and we make a product that goes in, and the materials in our product and the way our product functions impacts the overall carbon impact of that product with the consumer. So as you can see, there's a long list of everyone that has a chance to impact the carbon footprint. So the question that I have, I delve in the worlds of both quality and sustainability, and in the quality area, there are many industry standards very well prescribed on exactly how to do many different things. And there are some of those standards, like for LCA as well. But on carbon accounting and carbon footprinting, at least to me so far, it seems relatively undefined in how each level in the supply chain owns and contributes to that. So that doesn't have to be a roadblock, because we, as a company, have our own goals and values that we want to adhere to, and we will go about our work that way to keep reducing carbon footprint. But it is, to me, an area of lack of clarity that makes it makes for there to be a hard way to calculate, well, for example, what should I offset versus what should my supplier offset or my customer offset? And how do those all add up to getting us to a lower carbon impact world? So that's a lot of words to say two things, but those are, I'd say, my two areas: availability of primary data for semiconductors and how carbon impacts and carbon neutrality works at each level of the supply chain.
Great. And as soon as we finish our rounds of questions, we'll come back to that, and I'll ask Connie and Alex both to comment on that. So let's turn to Alex now and ask what were some of the pitfalls and misconceptions that you had to deal with on your journey?
I mean, like I said, we've been on this for a while, so there have been a lot of ups and downs, but what we're talking about now in terms of carbon neutral and carbon reduction and net zero specifically, you know, I have to agree with Anthony. The toughest thing that we're seeing is how do we, well, first of all, the accounting that he's talking about. Second of all, how do we track reductions from our supply chain through our footprint using LCA, right? We can very easily say our operations, you know, we just use less electricity, or, you know, fly less, or whatever these things are. The supply chain is a tough piece, and the use phase is also a tough piece, right? Because we take ownership for that as well, the use of all of our products. But the supply chain piece, so say if a company like Anthony's reduces their footprint, how does that get tracked in through our footprint when we're using generic LCA data? So that is one of the things that we're trying to figure out. We've come out with these reduction claims, but, you know, trying to figure out how do we take ownership for those reductions, and how do we track those reductions? That's the piece that for us is the toughest part. And if anybody has any, you know, answers to that, let me know.
I think Connie does.
So yeah, so that's the biggest obstacle at this point.
Chomping at the bit to answer. So I'm going to just let you answer that before I ask you the other question.
Well, I would say to both of you guys on the supply chain issues, you know, we've worked long and hard to move away from proxy data to supply chain specific data. And it's a long haul. It's a big challenge because you have to work one-on-one with each of your suppliers. And we've been successful with a lot of major suppliers in getting them to develop primary data and to give it to us. That's another hurdle. And increase the confidence and take away some of the uncertainty in our results. And we've only just this year been approached by one of those suppliers to looking at carbon neutrality themselves. And we're trying to figure out if they make their material carbon neutral, how do we pull that through our life cycle assessment, so that when at the end, when we're purchasing carbon offsets to make ours carbon neutral, we're not double offsetting. So it's a new challenge, but it's a happy one to have. So yeah, I think it takes a lot of supply chain engagement and a dedicated group of people focused on chasing down every supplier, teaching them what life cycle assessment is, connecting them with the resources to do life cycle assessment. Of course, getting the buy-ins to pursue it in the first place. But yeah, it's a big chore. Maybe we're lucky because we are not a really large company. We're a medium-sized company. We have like about $1 billion sales annually. So our number of suppliers is probably not as big as Navitas or HP. So it's a more manageable task. But yeah, I think it's a lot of work, but it's rewarding because you know that your numbers are real, that it's real impact you're reporting, not and reducing, not just industry average data or proxy data.
That's really helpful, and it's interesting. One of the questions that we have is how does carbon neutrality of a supplier affect you? and it's interesting that that's something you're still working through. So we'll have to revisit this when you figure it out. Back again.
I mean, it's a happy problem to have, but yeah, but figuring out how to do that within the scope of life cycle assessment is challenging.
Yeah, for sure. So Connie, let's ask you some of the pitfalls and misconceptions that you had to deal with in this journey, if you remember any of them.
You know, I think we suffer from them every day. It's not we haven't overcome them. I'm constantly amazed at the level of miscommunication about the topic. Because, you know, we've been so embedded in the concepts of carbon emissions and offsets for so long, we just assume everyone understands it too. And it's a big mistake to assume that your associates or your customers even know what carbon is or its connection to climate change. Now, if you're here today on this call, then you probably already understand it, but it's a big mistake to assume everyone else does. When we launched our carbon negative products, I can't tell you the hours that I spent explaining what that meant to dozens of people inside our business over and over again, and helping them craft language so that we could externalize the message. I take for granted that people understand it, and it's important to recognize that when you start talking about it. And I think the second, there's a big pitfall in credibility. Credibility is critical. You know, third-party verification, always taking a conservative approach is key. Don't let what your marketing claim wants to be drive your path to the numbers. You know, you've got to stick to the conservative and verified approach, because if you don't, when you're using carbon offsets, you might be accused of buying your way out of your responsibility to reduce your emissions. And offsets really need to be combined with authentic, actual reductions in impacts for them to be credible. So those are the pitfalls and concerns I have with carbon neutrality.
Thank you. And a lot of that I echo myself. that you really have to be authentic. So another question I have for each of you, and I'll start with Alexandra first, is what advice would you give to another company embarking on the journey to carbon neutrality?
It's a great question. I guess the first thing I would do is figure out what needs to be included in your footprint. And my advice would be, you know, we really can't just do scopes 1 and scopes 2 anymore, unless that's all you have, right? But most companies, their scope 3 is exceptionally large, especially companies that manufacture things. So the first step would be what needs to be included, and look at your scope 3. Otherwise, you're going to lose credibility, I think, if you don't include it right nowadays. And more than likely, you're going to need LCA to be able to figure that scope 3 piece out. Secondly, I would look at organizations that, you know, such as SBTI, and see, like, what are they requiring, and how can you might not be able to meet that now, but that is like the gold standard for being able to make these types of claims. So what do you need to do in order to get to be able to fit into an SBTI? I know for us, what we're starting to ask our suppliers is that they start heading in that direction, right? Because for us to be able to track their scope 1 and scope 2 through our own footprint is pretty tough. If they start moving towards an SBTI goal, then it gets a little bit easier for us to track, right? Because now we're kind of all moving along in the same direction. We're all pushing the scope 3. And then lastly, I think to Connie's point, need to understand all about carbon offsets, right? What makes them credible? What claims you can make on that side, but then also how do we start getting them now? I know for us, for some of our programs, some of our businesses, for the supplies business, for instance, it's going to be carbon neutral by 2030. You obviously can't get to net zero or to carbon neutral or 100% carbon reduction, right? You have to have offsets. So how do you start getting offsets now that are going to be credible in 2030 and affordable in 2030? So those are kind of the three main buckets that I would start to look at.
Great, thanks. Anthony, how about you? What would you start with?
Well, you know, as I said before, there's a lot to learn, right? So someone just getting into it, number one, I would suggest to find, you know, get to know the field, find some experts, get involved, you know, dedicate some time to meeting people, networking, understanding, because there are, it sounds like on this call, there's a lot of the same opinions, but I think, you know, throughout the world, there are a lot of different opinions on what is most important and what's required and how to go about it. So that, you know, that's one easy one to say. The other that I think is to focus on what you can control, especially coming from a smaller company perspective, that, you know, even as a small company or each individual, you can make a difference in what you do based on what you control, right? So if it's easy to see, oh, you know, this my numbers are high, or the LCA shows these big impacts, or they're impacts that, you know, for example, at Navitas, we use suppliers for all of our manufacturing, and we use really good suppliers, and they all have environmental and sustainability focuses within their companies. Yet today as a company, we are, compared overall for them, we are a small part of their business, although we are a very big part of their GAN business, but overall we are a small part of their business. And so it can be hard to impact things as a small company, but you can impact what you measure and what you control. And so I think that's a good place to start. It's in your control and you can do something about it, and it's defining your roadmap and your framework for how you improve over time.
Great, thanks. Connie, what would you suggest for folks embarking on the journey?
Well, I think that's the right word, it's a journey. And I think the biggest value of the journey is that you'll understand your carbon footprint first before you can be carbon neutral. And learning from the life cycle assessment of your products will give you the insight needed to drive down your environmental impact. So, you know, don't just make your goal to be carbon neutral. You're really not using all this great information you're going to learn along that journey. So look at, you know, understand your footprint and take action to reduce it, then offset it. And also, I think keep in mind on your journey when you're going to be purchasing carbon offsets that you choose the right offsets. You know, you combine verified life cycle assessments with carbon offsets that meet the highest standards to ensure credibility of your claims.
Great, thank you. Let's turn to our audience questions now, and we've had a bunch come in, and I'm going to just bounce right off of Connie's question and say, what makes an offset credible, and how has your view of offsets changed over time? And I'll start with you, Connie.
You know, yeah, I've got an answer to that because our view is changing. Now, I'm just going to tell you how Interface chooses offsets. It's not the be-all, end-all. This is just the process here. So we source offsets only from projects that meet third-party verified carbon offset standards. Standards like the Gold Standard, the California Climate Action Reserve, the American Carbon Standard, the VCS Verified Carbon Standards. And we also choose some projects that have additional benefits, such as the Climate, Community, and Biodiversity Standards. So there's a lot of good, credible offset standards. So we choose offsets that are verified. And we also add an additional requirement that we apply to ourselves, and that is vintage. How old are these offsets? Our primary concern is that they're third-party verified, but we restrict our vintages to within 3 years of the current year. So if we're purchasing offsets for product made in 2021, you know, the offsets have to happen in the real world from 2018 on. And in terms of location, we don't have requirements for where they are, but we do try to create a diverse portfolio of offsets covering a lot of different regions. But what we're leaning towards in the future is projects that are more focused on carbon removals rather than carbon emission reductions. Traditional and the majority of carbon offsets are emissions reduction projects, and we are beginning to prefer carbon removal projects. So that's kind of where we see the future for our choices.
Great. And has I understand your concept is changing for the future. Did it change over time as you went through this, or did you really set off right at the beginning for those high quality offsets?
You know, they just weren't available when we started, because we started so long ago, back in 2005. It was very limited, and it's really grown, and now there's just this huge, a lot more options for carbon standards and carbon registries in the voluntary market. And so we've just kind of grown up with the market. We've always had that it had to be third-party verified, and it had to be, and it had to have the vintage requirement, and it had to be regionally diverse, because we're offsetting products made at our factory in Australia, in Thailand, in Europe, in the US. So we had those things, and only recently have carbon removal projects become more readily available, although more expensive. But yeah, that's been a recent development, a recent focus of ours to look. So we think that's the next. And that's going to be the superior choice in the future.
Great, thank you. Alex, do you have anything to add to what Connie said?
Well, it's funny. I mean, that's what she said was the exact same thing that that I would say. I think the only thing that I would have to add is that, you know, right now, these different registries use different standards. They would use different standards to assess the same project. And I think the next step in order to get us further down the line on credible offsets is to, you know, ideally have a single standard. And not necessarily a single registry, but ideally a single standard so that we're all working off the same concepts for like additionality and leakage and durability. Because right now they vary pretty significantly. So we can, you know, be very diligent in getting these credits and getting credits that are, you know, top-notch credits. But we still have this variability that leads a little bit of uncertainty. So I think the next step along the line is you know, making these credits even more rigorous than they are now.
Great. Anthony, do you have anything to add or any questions along that line for the other two?
Oh, well, yeah, so offsets we're just starting to learn about. We're definitely in line with what they have said, Alexandra and Connie, on using high quality offsets. I guess the thing I'll add is that for a technology company, we're looking for offsets that are, you know, related to technology and or can help develop technologies to reduce carbon impacts. So right now, our part, you know, I talked about computing before, but a big area of use for our parts in the future is in data centers and in electric vehicles and e-mobility, but also in solar energy generation. And so our parts are used to make solar energy generation more efficient. And therefore like cheaper and easier to, you know, to continue to roll out. And so we would like to align our offsets with our business. And I think that's a really good additional value for us, is to be able to do that and to support solar energy generation projects, and, you know, with more work going into carbon carbon capture or other carbon removal type technologies, it potentially gives us an opportunity to help support that as another win for, you know, for our business and for the world. So.
Yeah, great. Thank you. The next question I'm going to throw out to any of you. Do any of you have, any of your companies have an internal price of carbon? And if so, how much are you applying to it?
I'll just answer that.
We are looking at it, but we don't have it.
Yeah, we do not have that either.
So we have the cost of our carbon neutral flows program, which is all the purchase of all the offsets. And every year we have to purchase offsets for that year's products that we put out into the world. And so we have an expense. And then we take that expense and then we allocate it per square meter of product sold. So we have an internal, it's like an internal carbon tax on our product, right? And it's based on the carbon footprint of the product per square meter and the cost of the carbon offset portfolio. But yeah, it's certainly not, we spend millions of dollars a year. Let's just leave it at that.
Right. Thank you. So one of the questions that just came in is, thanks for a wonderful discussion. I'm curious to know how much of your life cycle assessment results and its impacts are disclosed in the CSR reporting or any other public reporting for stakeholders.
I'm not sure what that, I'm not 100% sure what that question is, but for us, as I mentioned in our sustainable impact report, we do report on our full value chain carbon footprint, and 99% of that is based on life cycle assessment. We also publish the life cycle assessment of our products. Right now, the personal systems, the computer products are online. You can go online and find all the carbon footprints of our products. Print products we're in the process of putting online. So our data is available.
Thank you. Connie?
And at Interface, we do publish environmental product declarations on all of our products, so you can see the actual footprint per product. And we do publish our GHG emissions report, scope 1, 2, and 3. We previously used to report that in the Carbon Disclosure Project, CDP, but in the recent years, we've just been publishing to the very same data, but we've been just making a public document available annually that reports our total company scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions.
Thank you. Thank you. And Anthony, do you want to talk about your plans?
Well, like we've talked about, we're still in the process of completing our LCAs. And once we do, we plan to publish that result. We're also aligned and accepted with SBTI 1.5 degrees C target pathway, and plan to report against that as well. So that should be something we published in the near future.
Excellent.
That's a good point, Anthony. We just announced today our commitment to SBTI and set our targets. So we'll be reporting against I think a 2019 baseline and some targets for 2030. So that'll be another avenue that we'll be reporting going forward.
Super. Are any of you experiencing an increase in the need or request for LCA results from investors? Anthony, maybe you're closest to that.
Yeah, you know what? I am closest to that. I mean, I am pretty close to that, but I think I have to pass on answering at the moment.
Understood. Connie, you seemed like you were going to answer.
I was just going to say, I read about it. I read about it in the press and how it is happening, but I don't have any personal experience with it, and certainly no direct inquiries from our investors that I know of. Yeah.
Great. So for the electronics folks, both Anthony and Alexandra, question is, how do you account for the lag between the lifecycle inventory data on electronics and how fast those products change. So basically, your supply chain, how do you account for the fact that the products are changing so quickly?
Well, so I can go first. Well, the way we're approaching it so far is that when we ship a product, it's intended for a certain application, and the manufacturing is understood about what the impact is at that point, and the life cycle of that product for that application is understood based on some scenario analyses of how it will be used. And therefore, in our LCA, we are calculating, we can calculate the cradle to gate, and then the gate to grave, we apply when the product is shipped based on certain scenario analysis. That's how we're approaching it.
Great. Alex, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, so for us, we have tools that are specific to our products, so we're able to model the different components within our products, but you still have the problem with, using generic LCA data. So our approach is going to be getting better data from our suppliers and trying to augment our LCAs with that data. So that's how we're gonna be more, have more accurate LCAs, but also be able to track reductions using our LCAs.
Great, thank you. So let me just look. I think we might have one more. Okay, I think the other one Anthony already answered. So I want to thank everybody for this and let our audience know that in the LCA Institute next week at the ACLCA annual conference, there will be 4 sessions on carbon neutrality where you can learn more. In addition, I know that Anthony is going to be co-presenting during the conference. And Connie and Alex, feel free to jump in with any presentations that Interface or HP are making. Anything going on, Connie?
I think we're doing Aidan Gansert, our LCA specialist, is doing a presentation in the industry session for the lightning round. And still, should we talk about our carbon negative product?
Awesome. Alex, anything from HP that you know of?
Not that I know of.
That's all right. HP participates a lot, so the audience may just have to go and look for that. With that, we have gone through our questions and learned a lot. I know I learned a lot, and I want to extend a huge thanks to our panel for sharing their wisdom, and a thanks to our audience as well for all their wonderful questions, and close it out. So again, thank you everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks Anthony.
Thanks,
and
Lisa.
Alexandra. It was
Thank
great
you.
to hear what's going on there.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Definitely. Thanks, you guys. Take care.